I'd like to give a warm welcome now to Dr. Dean Ornish. Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you so much, Lorraine. I so appreciate the chance to be here with you. So I'm going to talk about a unified theory of lifestyle medicine. And lifestyle medicine is a field that I help create, which is using lifestyle changes not only to help prevent disease, but to treat and often even reverse it. John McDougall and I have been doing this work for over 45 years. And the program is really the same for all the research I'll be going over with you. It's a whole foods plant-based diet that's low in fat and sugar, moderate exercise, meditation, and other yoga-based stress management techniques, and support groups. Or to reduce it even more, one of my favorite quotes, which is the first quote in the Undo It book, is from Einstein. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. To reduce it to its essence, to eat well, move more, stress less, love more. And the more diseases we study, the more scientific evidence we have to show what a powerful difference these simple lifestyle changes can make and how quickly people can experience the benefits. A panel of experts from US News and World Report rates hospitals and clinics and medical schools and colleges and universities and so on. And then since 2011, they've been rating diets. And for the last 11 years, they've rated what they call the Ornish diet as #1 for heart health. And we found that these same lifestyle changes could not only help prevent, but often reverse the progression of the most common and costly chronic diseases. We showed for the first time in a randomized trial that heart disease could be reversed, as well as all these other conditions that you see here. And with all this interest in personalized medicine, I wonder, why is it that these same lifestyle changes can affect so many different things? It wasn't like there was one diet and lifestyle program for reversing heart disease, a different one for type 2 diabetes, and so on. It was the same for all of them. And so I wrote a book, co-authored with my wife, Ann, called Undo It. And it puts forth this, and that's me and Ann, and it puts forth this new unifying theory that the reason why these same lifestyle changes can affect so many different diseases is that they're not really so different. They all share the same underlying biological mechanisms, things like chronic inflammation, overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, changes in the microbiome, the 100 trillion cells that coexist with us in our gut, oxidative stress, apoptosis, and so on. Each one of these mechanisms affects all of these different conditions, and each one of these mechanisms is stimulated by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have. And the more diseases we study, the more scientific evidence we have to show how powerful these changes can be and how quickly they can occur. And so it also helps to explain what are called comorbidities, like why is it that you'll often find the same person has heart disease and type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure and high cholesterol and obesity and so on. And by the way, I didn't get dressed up today. I figure if I can't get dressed up on a Hawaii Zoom call, really, where can I, on a Sunday especially? But they all share the same underlying pathophysiology, which is why you often find the same person will have multiple of these conditions, which all come really from the same source. The EPIC study was a study in Europe of 23,000 people, and they found that just simple lifestyle changes, walking a half an hour a day or 3.5 hours a week, not smoking, eating a reasonably healthy diet, not this healthy, but reasonably healthy, and keeping a healthy weight prevented 93% of type 2 diabetes, which, by the way, when you think about it, half of the population today is diabetic or pre-diabetic, and yet 93% of it, it's probably closer to 98 or 99% of type 2 diabetes is preventable by making bigger changes in lifestyle. But also 81% of heart attacks, half of strokes, a third of all cancers. Again, these same lifestyle changes affect a wide variety of these conditions. And also seen in the Harvard's Nurse and Health Professionals study, over 100,000 nurses and doctors, those who never smoked, had a normal weight, moderate activity, et cetera, had lower risks of a lot of things, heart disease, cancer, all-cause mortality, and so on. And yet, this average doctor receives almost no training in nutrition. I'm on the working group of the American College of Cardiology. And the average, we published a paper a few years ago, the average doctor gets 4 hours of nutrition training a year, and the average cardiology fellowship in 4 years of fellowship gets none. So there's a lot of room for improvement. And I think that there's a convergence of forces that after so many years of doing this, that it finally is the right idea at the right time. On the one hand, the limitations of drugs and surgery, which used appropriately, drugs and surgery can be life-saving. We've all benefited from that. But they don't really treat the underlying cause of the problem. And so studies are showing, for example, that stents and angioplasties in stable patients really don't work that well, whereas lifestyle changes can often reverse it. And the healthcare costs are unsustainable. 86% of the $3.8 trillion we spent last year on healthcare is mostly sick care. And it turns out that 5% of people account for 50 to 80% of all of the healthcare costs and those are the people with chronic diseases. At the same time that the power of lifestyle changes is also becoming more well documented. And I'll share with you, I mean, our work, ironically, is using these very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art scientific measures to prove how powerful these very low-tech and low-cost and often ancient interventions can be. It even has an impact on COVID-19. We know, for example, that the people who are most likely to die from COVID have other chronic diseases. In one study that was done at Harvard and King's College in London, those eating a predominantly plant-based diet had a 9% lower risk of developing COVID and a 41% lower risk of getting severe COVID. Another study had done almost 3,000 doctors and nurses who got exposed to COVID pretty much every day because they were taking care of COVID patients. Those on a plant-based diet were 73% less likely, and those on a pescatarian diet who had some fish, 59% less likely to develop moderate to severe illness. But those on a high animal protein, keto, paleo diet were 4 times more likely to develop moderate to severe COVID. And we know now that vaccination, as important as it can be, doesn't really protect you fully. And so many people are looking for, what else can I do to raise my immune function? And 50,000 patients who were inactive had more than double the likelihood of dying or being hospitalized due to COVID. So I had this cartoon drawn to talk about what is the cause many years ago, and that we spend so much time in medicine mopping up the floor, treating the symptoms rather than treating the underlying cause. We're turning off the faucet. And, as I say, sometimes you do have to mop up the floor. Sometimes drugs and surgery can be life-saving. But even then, that to me is the beginning rather than the end. It's saying, okay, how did you get in this situation? And what can we do to help prevent you from being in it again? And what I'm continually amazed by and awed by is that our bodies often have a remarkable capacity to begin healing if we can turn off the faucet, and much more quickly than we had once realized, because these underlying biological mechanisms that we talked about earlier are so dynamic in both directions. You can get better quickly, you can get worse quickly. And everything I'm going to share with you was thought impossible. And to me, one of the reasons that I've spent so much of my adult life doing these research studies, they're very hard to do. They're hard to get funded. It's hard to get funded, something that people think is impossible, because without the funding, you can't show it works. And if they don't think it's going to work, they don't want to fund it. So we've just generally raised the money as we go along, which is kind of a crazy way to do a study, because you never know if you're going to run out of money or not. But it's been working. Unfortunately, everything's been able to come to completion. But properly done, we can redefine what's possible, as we've done in our earlier studies, which I'm about to share with you. And when we can redefine what's possible, we can give, at this point, millions of people new hope and new choices that they didn't have before. And to me, awareness is the first step in healing, and research is one way of being a powerful way of raising awareness. So I started doing these studies when I was a medical student in Houston at Baylor College of Medicine in 1977, 78, 45 years ago. And I took 10 men and women, put them in a hotel for a month, and they got better. And they not only felt better, but they were better in ways we could measure. This is what was then a new test called thallium, which is now a standard test. Thallium is a radioisotope. When you inject it into someone who's exercising, it goes where the blood goes. So you can see which parts of the heart are getting blood and which ones aren't. So you can see here, this circle here is a heart, and this dark area around 10 o'clock is not getting enough blood flow. And a month later, it was essentially normal, and that had never been shown before. It was only thought that you could slow down the rate at which people got worse. We showed you could actually get better, and much more quickly than anyone had thought possible. But nobody really believed it, because I was just a medical student, and it didn't really fit within what was thought to be possible. So they'd say, well, how do you know patients wouldn't have gotten better anyway? You didn't have a randomized control group for comparison. And I said, well, technically that's true, but have you ever had any patients get better like that? Well, no, but that's beside the point. So it gets held to a different standard. So I went back to school, finished my MD, then took another year off to do a second study. This time we did have a randomized control group, and the experimental group got better, the control group got worse, the differences were highly significant, and we published that in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And we found that most patients during that time became pain-free, which is a powerful motivator that I'll talk more about in a few minutes. Went to Boston to Harvard and Mass General to do my medical residency and fellowship, moved to San Francisco, joined the faculty at UCSF, and became a professor there, and founded the nonprofit Preventive Medicine Research Institute, which is a 501c3 nonprofit public foundation. And with this study, we used, again, the state-of-the-art scientific measures, quantitative arteriography to measure how much blockage there was in the arteries. And we actually flew our patients to Houston, to the best cardiac PET scanner at the time, to have cardiac PET scans. And we found that these were all blindly read by independent observers. The arteries got more clogged after 1 year and even more clogged after 5 years in the group, the usual care group, who were doing what most doctors recommended. They got worse and worse, maybe a little more slowly, but they still got worse. We found when people made bigger changes in all these different things, there was some reversal, less clogging after 1 year, which we published in the Lancet, which is the leading, most well-respected international medical journal. And then based on the findings after 1 year, we got support from the National Institutes of Health to extend the study for 4 more years for a total of 5 years, and found there was even more reversal after 5 years than after 1 year, whereas the control group, as you can see, got even worse after 5 years. So we published the 5-year findings in the Journal of the AMA. And we found a 400% improvement in blood flow on average in the patients who made these lifestyle changes after 5 years. This is a representative patient. You can see the artery is less clogged after a year. But the blood flow is really a fourth power function of the radius of the artery. So even a small improvement in the radius, because the artery is less clogged, causes an exponential improvement, in this case, a 400% improvement on average in blood flow. And blood flow is really the bottom line in heart disease. And the blockage is only one of many mechanisms that affects that. And blue and black at the beginning is no blood flow in the PET scan. Orange and white a year later is maximum. And it wasn't just a few patients that skewed the mean. 99% of the patients stopped to reverse the progression of their heart disease, whereas only 5% of the control group patients got better. And I had predicted at the beginning that the younger patients who had less severe disease would show more improvement, but it turned out I was wrong. It wasn't how old or how sick they were. The more they changed, the more they improved at any age. The lowest adherence got worse, the highest adherence to lifestyle changes got better, and the people who kind of did midway stayed the same. And there were 2.5 times as many heart attacks, strokes, bypasses, angioplasties, and stents in the control group as in the experimental group. Now, to put a human face on this, I'm going to show you just a 2-minute video of one patient more recently who was a doctor himself. Well, I'll let him tell the story. Here you go.
So the situation I'm describing here is of an internal medicine doctor who started a new chapter in his life with his wife, moving to Lake Arrowhead, having just opened a private practice office after all of our kids went to college and we could relocate. And just as this was ramping up, we had a horrible car accident which precipitated a heart attack that dropped my cardiac functioning down to basically 11 to 13 or 14 to 15% of what it should have been, which resulted in intractable chest pain, angina, trouble breathing, inability to walk from room to room, go upstairs without being carried. Was offered a heart transplant as the only way to stay alive. And at the 11th hour, I entered the Ornish program, which provided me with an entire paradigm shift with respect to stress management, exercise, diet, nutrition. And despite not believing it myself and having other physicians who didn't believe in it either, it worked beyond my wildest dreams. I'm now able to exercise moderately. I can work full time. I can live at 6,000 feet. And our quality of life is actually better than it was before.
I love doing this work. President Bill Clinton has talked publicly about being on this program for the last 14 or 15 years since his bypass was clogged up. He made this as a video tribute a few years ago. And again, whatever your politics, I think a former president, especially known for eating, dog eating McDonald's, can make these changes. I think that sets a great example for everyone. This is just a minute long.
Dean, congratulations on receiving the Benjamin Spock Award for Compassion in Medicine. As you celebrate this very well-deserved honor, I want to thank you for more than 25 years of friendship to Hillary and me, and for the difference you've made in so very many people's lives, including mine. You've not only changed the way the world thinks about personalized healthcare, you also are one of the kindest, most considerate people I've ever met. So I'm just one of the thousands of those who are happier and healthier, thanks to your guidance and the power of your example. And I'm grateful every day for the priceless gift you've helped to give me and our family. The ability to keep spending time with each other and to keep doing work we love. Thanks, friends. Congratulations again. I hope you have a great celebration.
So we then wondered if the same lifestyle changes might help affect the progression of early stage prostate cancer. And about 90% of men have what's called Gleason 6 prostate cancer. It's not the most aggressive form. The people who have higher Gleason scores need some kind of surgery or radiation in all likelihood right away. But these were people who had more common and less invasive kind. And we did this in collaboration with the chair of urology at UCSF, where I'm a professor, and at the time at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, one of the leading cancer centers. And we took men who had biopsy-proven prostate cancer who had elected for reasons unrelated to our study to do what was then called watchful waiting or now active surveillance, which means that they didn't have treatment, they were just monitored carefully. And so then we could randomly divide them into two groups and have a non-intervention control group for comparison, which you really can't do with most forms of cancer because most forms of cancer people get treated right away. We found that the PSA levels got worse or went up in the control group, went down or got better in the experimental group. Those differences were highly significant, and we published them in the Journal of Urology, the leading peer-reviewed medical urology journal. Again, we found that same pattern. The more change across both groups, the more people changed their lifestyle, the lower their PSA went. The high adherers went down, the low adherers went up. And when we added their serum to a standard line of prostate tumor cells growing in tissue culture in Bill Aronson's lab at UCLA, the tumor growth was inhibited 70% in the experimental group versus only 9% in the randomized control group. And it also occurred in direct proportion to the degree of lifestyle change. So PSA is an imperfect marker for prostate cancer. That's why we did this added test. But when you think about it, we took the blood of people who made these lifestyle changes, we put it into a petri dish with a tumor growing in tissue culture, and something in the blood inhibited the growth of that tumor. It's really quite amazing when you think about it. And we did a MR spectroscopy in this patient showing the tumor activity shrinking as well as the PSA going down during that time, during the first year. And none of the experimental group patients needed surgery or radiation during the first year, but 6 of the randomized control group patients did. So this was and still is the first and still the only randomized controlled trial that I'm aware of, showing that intensive lifestyle changes alone may slow, stop, and even reverse the progression of men who have early stage prostate cancer. This was, to corroborate this, at Harvard, the Physicians' Health Study that we talked about earlier, men who ate a mostly Western diet had a 250% higher risk of prostate cancer-related death and a 67% risk of all-cause mortality. But those who ate a mostly whole foods plant-based diet reduced their risk of death from all causes by over a third. So that kind of pattern, when you go from a typical American diet to a whole foods plant-based or near plant-based diet, you get a double benefit. You're not only not increasing the risk, but you're actually decreasing the risk, because there's at least there are thousands of substances that are protective in fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes and soy products that have anti-cancer, anti-heart disease, and even anti-aging properties: phytochemicals, bioflavonoids, carotenoids, retinols, isoflavones, genistein, lycopene, and so on. And that's where you find them. We then wondered, well, what are some of the mechanisms that can help explain this? So we did a study with Craig Venter, who was the first to decode the human genome. And we found that in just only 3 months, over 500 genes were changed. And in fact, turning on the good genes that keep us healthy and turning off the genes that cause us to get sick, and particularly turning off the genes that cause those mechanisms that I talked about at the beginning that are part of this unifying theory: chronic inflammation, the genes that control chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in the microbiome and telomeres and gene expression and so on. You're not really changing the gene, you're changing the switches that turn those genes off and on. They're proteins called sirtuins and methylation and histone and non-histone proteins and so on. And particularly turning off the RAS oncogenes, the ones that promote prostate, breast, and colon cancer. And you can see here, these are all genes that cause prostate, breast, and colon cancer. Red at the beginning is turned on, green at the end of 3 months is turned off. So you can see just the lifestyle alone, what a powerful difference it can make. And I think probably the biggest obstacle that I've had, and I know John McDougall's had, people like, oh, diet and lifestyle, that's kind of boring. How powerful could that be? It's got to be a new drug, a new laser, something really high tech and expensive to be powerful. And again, I think our unique contribution has been to show, using these high tech measures, how powerful these low tech measures can be. And again, we found that our program down-regulated the genes that are part of all these underlying chronic conditions that we discuss. So genes can double the risk of a heart attack, for example, but you can cut that in half by changing lifestyle. So our genes are a predisposition, but our genes are not our fate. Meditation alone can cause changes beneficial changes in gene expression. These are, this is done by Jeff Dusek at Harvard. This is not my work, but they looked at non-meditators, people who were taught to meditate for just 8 weeks, and those who did it long term. And you can see how it goes from red to kind of green to green, and the upregulated genes go from green to kind of red to red. Over 300 genes were changed in a beneficial direction in every case when people began to meditate, and even more so when they did it longer. We then did a study with Liz Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize for discovering telomeres, the ends of our chromosomes that regulate cellular aging. And as our telomeres get shorter, our lives get shorter, and the risk of premature death from all of these different chronic diseases we've been talking about goes up to the proportional to the shortening of telomeres. And she'd done studies with Alyssa Epple and others showing that chronic stress makes your telomeres get shorter faster. So does smoking cigarettes or eating junk food or being sedentary. So we met one day and I said, if bad things make them shorter, maybe good things make your telomeres longer. And sure enough, we found that in just 3 months, the telomerase, the enzyme that repairs and lengthens telomeres, increased by almost a third, which we published in the Lancet Oncology. And over a 5-year period, we showed for the first time they actually got longer. This is the first study. This was done about, 14 years ago? No, sorry, 9 years ago, showing that it was the first study showing that any intervention could actually lengthen telomeres, whereas they got shorter in the control group. And when we published this, the Lancet editors sent out this press release worldwide, calling it the first ever study showing that positive lifestyle changes may reverse aging on a cellular level. And again, we found the more people changed their lifestyle, the longer their telomeres got. And now we're in the middle of doing the first randomized trial to see if the same lifestyle changes can stop or perhaps even reverse the progression of men and women who have early stage Alzheimer's disease. And I think we're at a place with Alzheimer's is very reminiscent of where we were with heart disease, 45 years ago when I started doing work. As I mentioned then, it was thought at the time, if you had heart disease, the best you could do would be to slow down the rate at which you got worse, which is how most people view Alzheimer's today. The best you can do is slow it down. There have been billions of dollars spent in the last 20 years to find the magic drug to try to reverse Alzheimer's, and they've all failed. There've only been 2 drugs approved in the last 20 years. One 3 years ago, aducanumab, probably never should have been. It slows the rate of progression by a little bit, $56,000 a dose, and a third of the people got brain hemorrhages and brain swelling. So Medicare is only covering it under investigational. Cousin of that drug, lecanemab, got approved about a month ago. It also just slows the rate of getting worse, but it had 20% of the people showed brain hemorrhages and brain bleeding and brain swelling. But it just shows you how desperate people are for a sense of hope. And again, what's good for your heart is good for your brain and vice versa. So the same risk factors affect both conditions, the same biological mechanisms affect both conditions, which is why I think that if moderate changes back then slowed the rate of heart disease and we found more intensive ones could actually stop or reverse it, maybe the same is true for Alzheimer's, ounce of prevention, pound of cure. It's hard to reverse a chronic disease. So we'll know more in about 6 months, but right now we're in the middle of doing the study, and it's very rewarding in that sense. There are also health policy implications that affect not just in this country, but worldwide. And it's kind of sad because so often, so many countries, developing countries, are starting to eat like us and live like us and all too often die like us. And ironically, the diet they were eating before they started to copy ours is the one that we found could prevent and reverse so many chronic diseases, a whole foods plant-based diet. And more people are dying of chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes and heart disease than AIDS, TB, and malaria combined. And yet it's diverting a lot of resources away from things that really do require drugs like AIDS, TB, and malaria to things that can often be prevented or even reversed through simply changing diet and lifestyle. And there are 3 major areas that are really affecting us. One is the hunger crisis, the global warming crisis, and the health crisis. Let me just kind of go through these. From the hunger crisis standpoint, what's good for you is good for the planet. What's personally sustainable is globally sustainable. It takes 14 times more resources to make a pound of meat-based protein than plant-based protein. I went on the board of the San Francisco Food Bank years ago because I heard that 1 out of 5 children in the Bay Area goes to bed hungry. I mean, we're a very prosperous city overall. That's just not okay. It's 1 out of 8 nationwide. It's not that we don't have enough resources, it's that it's a misallocation of resources. And so I just tell people, look, if you just had a meatless Monday, and just eat, one meal, that if you feel like your choices have meaning, if you imbue your diet choices with meaning, something as primal as what we put in our mouths every day can affect all 3 of these things I talked about a moment ago. That for many people is meaningful. My son is a gifted musician, and one of his favorite indie bands is called Wolfpack, and the frontman is a vegan. And we went backstage to say hi to him before the concert, and he said, in my concerts, I usually spend about 15 minutes in the middle of the show talking about why I'm on a plant-based diet, and I often cite your work. And since you're here, why don't you go and do it in the middle of my concert? I said, what? You want me to go out in the middle of your concert and talk about why people should be on a plant-based diet? Are you crazy? And he said, no. So I said, okay. So I did it. So for 15 minutes, I was cool to my son. This was at the Greek Theater in Berkeley. It was an outdoor concert. There were probably 15,000 people there. And I didn't talk to, these were mostly, people in their, teens and 20s. I didn't talk to them about heart disease and diabetes and strokes and Alzheimer's. They think they're immortal when you're 19 years old. But I said, there's so often you feel like, what can I do as one person to make a meaningful difference with global warming or feeding the hungry or things like that? And it turns out something as primal as what we eat every day can affect all those things. And they really got that, that, oh, this is something I can do. I'm not helpless. I can make a difference in the world. From a global warming crisis, livestock causes more global warming than all forms of transportation combined. I used to get into friendly discussions with Al Gore where I said, it's great to have small cars and fluorescent light bulbs, but where you can really make a difference is more people, gave up eating meat. And to his credit, not just because of me, of course, but because he's such a thoughtful guy, he became a vegan, and even though he's a cattle rancher. And again, because when you realize that more global warming is caused by livestock consumption than all forms of transportation combined, that's where we can really make an important difference. And from a health crisis, as I mentioned, 86% of the $3.8 trillion that we spend, almost $4 trillion in healthcare costs, that are really sick care costs, are due to chronic diseases that can often be prevented or even reversed by making bigger changes in diet and lifestyle. And then we can make better care available to more people at lower cost by freeing up these resources. We found that these approaches are not only medically effective, they're also cost effective. They save money as well as saving lives. And we did a couple of demonstration projects. The first one, well, it turns out, as I mentioned, that 5% of the people account for 50 to 80% of all healthcare costs. And heart disease is number one among them. So by trying to do general wellness, it's sometimes hard to show cost savings. But if you target people who have heart disease, then we've shown that we can save money very quickly. And the first study we did was an 8-site multi-center demonstration project. It was chaired by the chief of medicine at Harvard, Alexander Leith. And we had 4 private hospitals, academic centers, I should say, that were UCSF and Harvard and Beth Israel, New York, and Scripps, and 4 community hospitals in Omaha, Des Moines, South Carolina, and Florida. And we found that almost 80% of people who, absent our program, would have had a stent or a bypass, were able to choose our program as a direct alternative. And Mutual of Omaha found that they saved almost $30,000 per patient in the first year. And it's important to show cost savings in the first year because they know that a third of people change jobs every year, and then with it, they usually change their insurance companies. And so they say, why should we spend our money for some future benefit that chances are some other company is going to get? So showing the savings in the first year was really important. We then did a study with Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield, who was covering our program and then began providing it at 26 sites in West Virginia, Nebraska, and Pennsylvania. And they compared it to a control group matched for age and gender and disease severity. And the costs were the same at the beginning, which is what you'd expect. But after just 12 weeks of our program, they cut the costs in half in year 1. And those costs persisted over at least 3 years, even though it was just a 12-week program. And when they looked at the subgroup of people that they'd spent at least $25,000 on in the previous year, they cut their costs in those patients by 4-fold. Again, by reducing hospital admissions, emergency room visits, medications, operations, things like that. So again, that's really getting the attention of a lot of corporations because most large corporations are self-insured so that any cost savings accrue directly to their bottom line. I realized that it wasn't enough to have good science. We had to change reimbursement because, as in this cartoon, he says, I can operate even though a strict diet, you better operate. My insurance doesn't cover a strict diet. And if it's reimbursable, it's sustainable. If it's not reimbursable, it's just going to be on the fringes. So I spent 16 years working with CMS to see if they would cover our program through Medicare. And in January 2011, 11 years ago, CMS agreed to cover our program. They created a new benefit category called intensive cardiac rehabilitation. But along the way, it was really, challenging. And there was one person who was the head of Medicare years ago when they were evaluating this and said, well, is it safe for older people to walk and meditate and eat vegetables and quit smoking and love more, compared to getting your chest cut open, which, as it turns out, in angioplasties and stents and even bypasses, that unless you're in the few percentage of people who have the most severe disease, they don't work nearly as well. So it got a little, surreal at sometimes, but I'm deeply grateful to Medicare for covering the program. This was the decision memo that they came up with to cover the program after many years of review. And once they covered it, as I hoped, many other insurance companies began to cover it as well. And then last year, what was another game changer, they agreed to cover my reversing heart disease program when done by Zoom. So now we can reach people wherever they live. They can live in Hawaii, although for many years HMSA was covering it. They may still be covering it, I'm not sure. But now we can reach people wherever they live in their homes. They can be in rural areas, in food deserts, and other countries even. That really will help reduce health disparities and health inequities, as opposed to having to live within driving distance of one of the hospitals or clinics we've trained, which are generally in bigger cities. And so if anyone of you is interested in that, just go to our website at ornish.com. It's a team approach. It's a doctor, a nurse, a meditation teacher, exercise physiologist, dietitian, and psychologist, and they work together as a team. People come for 18 4-hour sessions. They come twice a week for 4 hours at a time for 9 weeks. And each time they get what's shown here, an hour of exercise, which you find in a regular cardiac rehab program, but they also get these 3 other modalities that you don't get in regular cardiac rehab: an hour of meditation and yoga, a support group. And the support groups are not helping people just to stay on the diet. They're a powerful intervention in their own right. I'll talk more about that at the end of this. And an hour of a lecture with a group meal. This was a study that was done where they compared people who went through our intensive cardiac rehab or ICR program with traditional cardiac rehab. And in every measure, they showed more improvement. Not surprisingly, again, when you make bigger changes, you get more improvements. And this was done just a year ago or so at another site in San Diego. And they found that what's really interesting is that the adherence to our ICR program, 96% of the people finished all 72 hours, and yet only 68% of the people finished the standard cardiac rehab, which is just the hour of exercise. And yet we're doing the hour of exercise plus these 3 other hours. That's so counterintuitive. Why is it that we're getting better adherence to a harder program that takes longer? And the answer is because you feel so much better so quickly. It reframes the reason for changing from preventing something bad from happening years down the road, which is really hard to sustain, to joy and pleasure and love and feeling good, like that guy in the video that I showed. This is a guy who couldn't walk from one room to the next without getting chest pain, had to be carried up to his room, couldn't practice medicine, couldn't make love with his spouse, couldn't play with his kids without getting chest pain. And within a few weeks, he was able to do all those things and avoid having a heart transplant, which is about the most radical thing that a person can have done. Not to mention the fact that it costs over $1 million to whoever's paying for it. And yet we're just doing this for lifestyle changes. And so what they also found was that after about a year, major adverse cardiac events were 54% more likely in the exercise alone group than the intensive cardiac rehab group. And heart failure hospitalizations were 3-fold higher, 8% versus 2%. So again, when you make bigger changes, the paradox is that sometimes it's easier to do because you feel so much better so quickly. It's not about fear of dying, it's about joy of living. And joy and pleasure and love and feeling good are really what are sustainable. We've also met with Prince Charles several times. This was about 3.5 years ago. We met at his home in Highgrove. And then we met again last June. At the time, 3.5 years ago, he said, if you could just virtualize your program and do it by Zoom, it'd be a lot easier because you could do it from the US while we're in the UK. And at that time, I didn't think it was going to be possible because I just thought it was too high touch a program to do by Zoom. But then when COVID hit, we had to virtualize the program. And to my great surprise, I found it worked just as well. This was a video that he made as part of a conference that his doctor and I did together.
I must say, I was fascinated to meet once again with Professor Dean Ornish and his wife Anne earlier this year at my home at Highgrove. They are remarkable leaders in lifestyle medicine and have demonstrated that simple lifestyle changes, improving diet and exercise, reducing stress and building relationships, can not only prevent, but even reverse the progression of many diseases.
I keep forgetting he's King Charles now, not Prince Charles. And again, if it's reimbursable, it's sustainable. And if it's pleasurable, it's sustainable. And if it's meaningful, it's sustainable. That's what we found. I mean, to put it in context, only half to 2/3 of people who are prescribed statins to lower their cholesterol are not taking them after just 4 to 6 months. And they're a proven benefit in people who have heart disease. Usually someone else pays for it. And the side effects are not that great in most people. So why are we getting better results? I mean, better adherence to a much more intensive lifestyle program than just taking a pill once a day. And again, the pill doesn't make you feel better, but the lifestyle changes do. And so it redefines and for many people, those are choices worth making, not just to live longer, but to live better. And it's like what I get is so much more than what I give up. That's an equation that's meaningful. Just again, it's joy of living instead of fear of dying. And again, if what you gain is so much more than what you give up, and quickly, because these biological mechanisms are so dynamic. And study after study, I mean, people will say, okay, I get the, eat well, okay, got to eat. It's just a question of what, and move more. That's, you're really out there doing something. I get that. And stress less. Well, I don't know, but okay, stress is important. I'm pretty stressed out. Okay, let me give that a try. But the love more, what's that about? And people think, what are you, this is the clothing optional part of your program. And I said, no. Love is about love and relationship. The real epidemic or pandemic isn't just heart disease or type 2 diabetes, it's loneliness and depression. 50 or 60 years ago, many people had more social networks, real social networks, not just virtual ones. A neighborhood where you grew up in, where you got to know your neighbors, and you had 2 or 3 generations of people living together, a church or synagogue or club or mosque or something that you went to regularly, an extended family that you saw regularly, a job that felt secure that you'd been at for 10 years or more. And many people, they don't have any of those things. And you say, well, okay, that's just progress, but it's not really progress, because study after study have shown that people who are lonely and depressed are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely than those who have a sense of love and connection and community. And I don't know anything that has a more powerful impact than that. And in part, it's because you're more likely to smoke and overeat and drink too much and work too hard when you're lonely and depressed. People say things like, I've got 20 friends in this pack of cigarettes and they're always there for me and nobody else is. Take away my 20 friends, what are you going to give me? Or food fills that void, or fat coats my nerves and numbs the pain, or opioids numb the pain. There was just a $3 billion settlement recently with one of the drug companies. Or working all the time distracts me from my pain, or video games distract me from my pain. And so I've learned that information is important, but it's not usually sufficient to motivate most people to make lasting changes in lifestyle, because we all know we're going to die, but people don't want to think about that most of the time. Fear is not a sustainable motivator. And information, if information were enough, nobody would smoke. It's not like people don't know it's bad for them. It's on every pack of cigarettes. So I realized we have to not just focus on the information or even the behavior, but these deeper issues. And when we work on that level, then we find that people have less need to numb their pain or distract themselves from their pain. And then they're much more likely to make lifestyle choices that are life enhancing than ones that are self-destructive. Anything that brings us together is healing. Even the word healing comes from the root to make whole, yoga, from the Sanskrit, to yoke, to unite, union. These are old ideas that we're rediscovering. So in my limited understanding, the deepest roots of suffering and the deepest roots of healing come from bringing, both on an individual level and even on a social level, are to bring us together. David Spiegel did a landmark study many years ago in The Lancet with women with metastatic cancer. Half of them had a support group and the other half, randomly assigned, didn't. And the group with the support group lived over twice as long than the group that didn't have that. Now, that was the only difference. A skeptic might say, oh, give me a break. Talking about my feelings, if I've got breast cancer, metastatic, is going to help me live longer if I've got cancer. Are you kidding me? But it does. We are touchy-feely creatures. We're creatures of community. That's how we've survived as a species all these years. That's what brings us together. So anything that brings us, that you need trust to create the vulnerability to open your heart, to be intimate, which is in turn what leads to healing and meaning. And Twitter, which is having all kinds of problems these days, it turns out that in almost 150 million tweets, those that showed the most negative social relationships, disengagement, and particularly anger, were better predictors of heart attacks and strokes, even than smoking or diabetes or hypertension or obesity. Anger is the one emotion that's been chronically shown to be associated with an increased risk of heart disease and so many other conditions. And it begins with, seeing people as being fundamentally different than you, as the other. Once you're like, they're different, they're those Muslim terrorists, those Mexican rapists, whatever you want to define as being fundamentally different from you. Once they're different, then you can do bad things to them because they're not you. But one of the real powers of meditation or any spiritual practice, if you take it far enough, is that, the ancient swamis and rabbis and priests and monks and nuns and mullahs and so on didn't develop meditation to unclog your arteries or perform better in sports or business or school. They can certainly help you do all those things. But they're really powerful techniques for quieting down our mind and body enough to experience more of an inner sense of peace and joy and well-being, and to realize that that's there all the time if we tap into it and don't disturb it. And then the question becomes not how can I get more peace, but how can I stop disturbing what's already there? But if you take it even further, it can give you what my teacher used to call a double vision, that on one level we're separate, you're you and I'm me, and we can have this nice conversation. But another level, we're already interconnected, that we are different aspects of the same oneness, if you will, that ineffable oneness that even given a name is to limit that kind of double vision. And so to the extent that we can have that, that's to me where the roots of healing are the most powerful. Compassion naturally flows out if we're just different things in different forms. And of course, compassion flows from that. The golden rule flows from that. We go from the I, separate I, lonely, isolated, depressed of illness to the we of wellness. Aldous Huxley wrote a wonderful book called Perennial Philosophy years ago that said, what are the common themes in all the major religions once you get past the rituals that people fight and kill each other over? And it's altruism, forgiveness, compassion, and love. And they all come out again of that same unity consciousness, that whether you get that through meditation or prayer or psychedelics or whatever path you change, ultimately, when you have that experience, it really transforms how we see ourselves in relation to other people. And what I call the conspiracy of love, because when someone's hurting, when they're first diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, for example, there's an openness to change, a receptivity to change, because change is hard. But if you're hurting badly enough, and you can show someone how they can reduce that pain fairly quickly by making these changes, then they often go look back and say, gosh, having a heart attack was one of the best things that ever happened to me. You say, what, are you nuts? The first time someone told me that. He said, no, that's what it took to get my attention to begin making these changes that have helped me rediscover inner sources of peace and joy and well-being. They're improving my relationships with my friends and family and loved ones. And, I feel better than I felt in so many years. I'm losing weight. I have more energy. I think more clearly. I need less sleep. I can do things I couldn't do for a long time. And so that's why after 45 years of doing this work, I'm as passionate, if not more passionate, than I have from the beginning, because how often in life do we get a chance to empower other people in ways that can really transform their lives for the better? And for those of us who are healthcare professionals, it allows us to really not only have the science of medicine, but also the art of it, our role as healers and not just as technicians, and to help people use that experience of suffering as a doorway for transforming their lives.
The first one was from Gary Gromit, who wants to know if you can do something to get the VA to offer, the Veterans Administration to offer the Ornish program, as he is a veteran.
Yeah, it's a great idea. If you're a veteran, if you have Medicare, whether or not you have a veteran, then Medicare will cover the program. And we're doing it virtually now, so you can do it anywhere. Before, you had to live within driving distance of one of the hospitals or clinics we've trained, but now you can do it from the comfort of your own home. So anyone who has Medicare or Aetna or Blue Shield of California, and probably others as well, can have the program done. And so if you're over, if you're Medicare eligible, then you would be. The VA is not yet offering it directly themselves, but like I say, if you have Medicare, then you'll be eligible through that doorway.
There has been some evidence that you can get really great results from, they've shown some studies have shown amazing improvement with only dietary changes. What do you think of just doing the plant-based diet itself without the other lifestyle changes? And why did you include other lifestyle changes in the Ornish program?
Well, there's a synergy that comes when you change a lot of things at the same time. It's more than additive. And there's clearly enough scientific evidence for each of the 4 components of my reversing heart disease program. Exercise, there's tons of information showing how useful exercise is, both strength training and aerobic. Meditation and other yoga-based stress management techniques. There's a whole literature around that. Such social support, love and intimacy. There's a lot of scientific evidence around that. And any of my books, especially the Undo It book, cites hundreds of articles that explain that, as well as diet. So my question would be, why would you only want to do one thing when all these things really are beneficial? And there's a synergy that comes when you change a lot of these things at the same time. And the paradox is that sometimes it's actually easier to change a lot of things at the same time, even though that may be counterintuitive. People think, well, it's hard enough to change diet. But 93% of the people who start my program, my Medicare covered program, finish all 72 hours of that. To put that in context, less than half to 2/3 of people who are prescribed cholesterol-lowering drugs are taking them just 4 to 6 months later, and that's just taking a pill once a day. So the idea that taking, a pill is easy and changing lifestyle is hard, or changing one aspect of lifestyle is easier than changing four, turns out not to be true, because when you make big changes, to the degree you do them, most people find that they feel so much better so quickly. It reframes the reason for making the changes from fear of dying to joy of living, from preventing something bad from happening years down the road, which is hard to really sustain motivation for, to, oh, my chest pain goes away, or I feel better, I can do more things, I can play with my kids, I can make love with my spouse, I can go back to work, I can do all the things that make life worth living. And finally, in all of our studies, we correlated adherence to each of the components of the program, as well as to the program overall, and what happened in their, whatever it was we were measuring, whether it was their amount of blockage in their coronary arteries and heart disease, or their PSA levels in prostate cancer, or the amount of reduction in their blood pressure, or their cholesterol, or their blood sugar, or their length of their telomeres, whatever we were measuring. And I had predicted incorrectly that the younger people with less severe disease would do better, but it turned out that the primary determinant of improvement was not how old or how sick they were, it was how much they changed their lifestyle in each of these aspects. So we found overall, and we published this in the Lancet and in the Journal of the American Medical Association, that the more you change your lifestyle, the more you improve at any age, which is a very empowering realization and for many people. But also the adherence to each component of the program was directly correlated with the degree of improvement in each of these things. And again, there's a synergy that comes that 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 10, not just 4 here.
The next question is, what diet do you follow personally?
I follow the Ornish diet. It seems to be working well for me.
Very good. And do you take supplements? And if so, what supplements do you take?
I do. I take a good multivitamin. I take coenzyme Q10. I take magnesium. I take algae-based omega-3s. I take quercetin. I take True Niagen, which is an NAD+ supplement. Vitamin C. What else do I take? Vitamin D. I'm sure there's a couple of things I'm missing, but that's pretty much the gist of it.
Oh, okay. And the next question is, what new research are you planning?
Well, I'm in the middle of doing the first randomized trial to see whether these same lifestyle changes may stop or perhaps even reverse the progression of men and women who have early stage Alzheimer's disease. And I think we're at a place with Alzheimer's very reminiscent of where we were with heart disease when I began doing studies, 44 years ago. In other words, the book that I wrote, the latest book called Undo It, puts forth this unifying theory that the reason why these same lifestyle changes can affect so many of the most common and costly chronic diseases, heart disease, diabetes, prostate cancer, high blood pressure, and perhaps Alzheimer's, is that they all share the same underlying biological mechanisms. And these mechanisms, in turn, are directly influenced by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and social support we have. And I think Alzheimer's may be the latest example of that. When we started doing research on heart disease, it was thought the best you could do was to slow down the rate at which your heart disease got worse. You could get worse more slowly. We found that when people made bigger changes in lifestyle, and they changed a lot of things at the same time, as we talked about a moment ago, we showed for the first time in a randomized trial that you could actually reverse the progression of early stage heart disease. In other words, people got better and better rather than worse and worse. And we know what's good for your heart is good for your brain and vice versa, because again, they share a lot of these same biological mechanisms. So my hypothesis is that just as more moderate changes have been shown to slow the rate of progression of heart disease, we found more intensive ones could reverse it. We're hoping the same may be true for Alzheimer's as well. And we'll know fairly soon if that's working or not.
Thank you. Another question was, what do you eat in a typical day? Like, what did you have for breakfast and lunch today?
What did I have for breakfast? I had a banana, and then I worked out and did some strength training, and I do swimming for aerobics and strength training with weights and resistance training. Then came back and had a bowl of whole grain cereal with no sugar soy milk and half pint of blueberries. That was my breakfast. And for lunch, I had what did I have? I had an Urban Remedy. Actually, I think I even have the right here. I had an Urban Remedy macro bowl. No, I have no financial relationship with them. It's a nice vegan, tasty lunch, and that's what I had.
Oh, sometimes people follow a good diet and exercise and do that for a while, and they still come down with a serious illness of some sort. How do you account for that?
Well, nothing works all the time for everyone, not drugs, not surgery, not lifestyle, not diet, not anything. There's always an element of mystery to all of this. We don't have all the answers. Most people do well when they eat a healthy plant-based diet, especially when they make these other lifestyle changes, but not everybody. There's an element of mystery to all this. Mother Teresa died of heart disease. It wasn't because she wasn't compassionate enough. So I think we have to have a certain level of humility that while our genes are not our fate, in some cases, the genes can be a primary determinant, and lifestyle can slow it down, but not necessarily stop it. If you have prostate cancer, for example, there are some 90% of people have a less aggressive Gleason score of 3+3, let's say. And for them, under their doctor's care, we've shown that these same lifestyle changes may stop or even reverse its progression in many cases. But there are other people who have Gleason 9, and who have very aggressive forms of the disease, or who have breast cancer that may be, triple negative, that the genes really do play an overwhelming part of that. So I've just learned that not to be too absolute about anything. And it's important also because you don't want to start blaming the victim, they say, oh, well, if they just eaten healthier, or if they just done more, then maybe they'd be better off, and it's hard enough to get sick without having to be blamed. There's a big difference between being empowered and being blamed. And empowered is, yes, there's a lot we can do to reduce the likelihood of getting sick, and often even to reverse its progression. Nobody's shown that more than I have. But there's also an element of mystery to all of this, and I think we have to be compassionate with ourselves and others when they get sick despite their best efforts.
Real quick, there was a question about, are the results the same for grass-fed beef versus regular beef?
Well, that's one of those things that people, would love to believe, but it's not true. I mean, the only advantage of grass-fed beef over factory farm-raised beef is that it's a lot better for the cow, and that's a lot to be said for that. We treat cattle horribly and cruelly, and so many animals that are raised just to be eaten. And so for that reason alone, if you're going to eat meat, it's better to eat grass-fed beef. But in terms of it being healthier for you, it's really not. The only thing that's actually ever been shown that grass-fed beef that has a little bit more of the omega-3s, but that's not the best way to get omega-3s. The omega-3s really come from the algae. The fish that people eat for omega-3s really get it from eating the algae. So why not just go straight to the source, and then you don't get the mercury and the dioxin, the PCBs, and all the other things. And in the case of grass-fed beef, you're still getting the animal protein, which itself is atherogenic and harmful in many ways and inflammatory. But also you're getting the other toxicities that are found in meat that I go into great detail in my book that you're better off avoiding. So from a purely humanistic standpoint, grass-fed beef is better, but from a health standpoint, it really isn't.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I have arthritis, not rheumatoid arthritis, but in several parts of my body. I'm 82. I've been vegan for 20 years. I exercise a great deal. I have family support. Is there anything dietary that I could do that would help with that?
Well, there are several things. First of all, I presume you're not eating too much sugar or refined carbs and things like that?
No, I'm not.
Okay. You could also try getting CBD, which has a lot of anti-inflammatory effects, and meditation and exercise are really quite good for arthritis, especially osteoarthritis. Social support, spending time with your friends and family and loved ones, anything that can reduce that inflammatory response can really make you feel better.
And then it's not going to reverse it, huh?
Well, it
Okay.
can actually, yeah. I mean, we have lots of patients who whose arthritis gets better, especially osteoarthritis, which it sounds like you've got, where
That's
the
what I
pain can be greatly diminished and often can go away for long periods of time.
Thank you.
From Chitra, I have tried to do your program. I am on Medicare with an AARP supplement plan and have not been accepted. What do you suggest?
Well, you have to have heart disease to be eligible for the program for Medicare to pay for it. There are like 6 or 7 different criteria. If you have angina, or you've had a heart attack or a stent or a bypass or a heart valve replacement, or you've had heart failure, any one of those things would make you eligible for the program. So if you in fact have had one of those things and you weren't eligible, then they made a mistake, just send me an email and we'll see what we can do.
I did the Ornish program, which I really liked, and I'm just wondering if Ornish is considered health-based, why are egg whites and yogurt allowed on the diet?
Yeah, well, for the cardiac program, we included that as a compromise when I first started doing this work. For the more recent studies, like beginning with the prostate cancer study, it's been vegan since then. So it's kind of a holdover from the past.
I wanted to know, what do you suggest for people who actually have problems with certain vegetables, with their digestive system, that don't digest certain vegetables well?
Not to eat them. I mean, if someone has a hard time digesting a certain vegetable, there are plenty of others, just avoid those. Although sometimes people think they have problems when they may not necessarily, or maybe in the way it's prepared. So it depends if they're actually allergic to it, if they have, they swell up and can't breathe, and that's something that I definitely want to avoid. If it's something that maybe it gives them a lot of gas, like certain beans, for example, how they're prepared can often make a difference. So we would have more time than we have for now, but those are the kinds of things I would ask about.
Breast implant illness, silicone breast implants. Silicone in the body degenerates and it starts microgel leaks of not just the silicone, but heavy metals associated with the building. Are you aware of this?
I am. Well, I'm a doctor. I'm interested in these things, brain fog and things like that. There's no way to test for it is the problem. I mean, have you had your breast implants removed?
Yes.
Did that help?
Yes, it helped.
Thank you all for the opportunity to be of service. I hope at least part of this has been useful. And I look forward to the next time our paths cross. So thank you. If you want more information about our work, go to ornish.com. If you want information about our research, go to pmri.org, which stands for Preventive Medicine Research Institute, which also talks about the Alzheimer's study we're doing. And I want to say, Lorraine, thank you, and to John McDougall for introducing us. And until the next time our paths cross, thank you.
Well, Dr. Dean Ornish, thank you so much for a very impressive presentation. Aloha.